The Treaty of Ghent, 1814. The agreement that signed at Ghent is essentially an armistice. Both sides agree to stop fighting and to restore any conquered territory. There was no mention of pre-war U.S. grievances for impressment, the Indian Menace, the Orders in Council, search and seizure, confiscations. Americans retained the right to fish off the Canadian coast. And most Americans were extremely happy with the treaty because most expected to lose some territory, and we lose none. So we hold our own against the British. We don't lose any territory. And even though most of the pre-war U.S. grievances aren't addressed, we still come out kind of whole. We don't lose anything. At the Hartford Convention, New England Federalists and some Republicans adamantly opposed the war. And they almost succeeded in defeating Madison in the 1812 election. As the war dragged on, New England extremists became even more vocal about their dislike of the war. The Hartford Convention, which takes place between December 15, 1814 and January 5, 1815, was attended by Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and partially by New Hampshire and Vermont. And the purpose of the Hartford Convention was to discuss their grievances and to seek a redress for their wrongs. The immediate goal was to secure financial assistance from Washington due to the British blockading menace on New England shores. But at the Hartford Convention, a minority of radical delegates urged for secession of the Northeast. So they're urging that the Northeast break away from the United States and become its own country. And that radical group is outvoted by more moderate Federalists. The convention recommended amendments to the Constitution. It sought to end the Three-Fifths Compromise to reduce Southern influence in the House because they're upset. They feel that the South and the West were the two regions that drove the United States into this war that they disliked. They also wanted a two-thirds vote for an embargo, for admission of Western states to the Union, and for a declaration of war. They sought to limit the term of the president, and they sought to deny naturalized citizens' right to hold office. So they wanted the only people to be able to hold office would be people that were born in the United States. A trio of envoys from Massachusetts traveled to Washington with the Hartford Convention demands. But the Battle of New Orleans and the Treaty of Ghent had made their pleas moot. Basically, the war was already over, so the demands that come out of the Hartford Convention aren't going to lead to anything because the war is already over. The Hartford resolutions end up being the death knell for the Federalist Party. In 1816, the Virginian James Monroe crushes his Federalist opponent. There's exaggerated treasonous accounts of what takes place at the Hartford Convention regarding secession that hurt the Federalist cause. They're seen as a party of secession, a party that tried to break away from the Union. Until 1815, more talk of nullification and secession in New England than in any other section, including the South. So the Federalists, because of their talks of secession, because they maintained a dislike for the War of 1812 even after the war had ended and brought about a sense of national unity, leads to the popularity of the party waning completely. For a while, they only exist in the Northeast, and then eventually they completely fall apart and disband. International legacies. It revived an intense American hatred of the British and a mutual suspicion that would last decades between the two countries. It also leads to Canadian patriotism and nationalism. Some say it's the birth of the Canadian nation. The Rush-Bagot Treaty in 1817 severely limited naval armament on the Great Lakes. By 1870, the U.S. and Canada had shared the longest unfortified border in the world. And probably the most important thing to come out of the War of 1812 is American nationalism. Americans, for the first time, start to see themselves as American. Before the War of 1812, most people viewed themselves as being part of whatever state they were from. So people from Virginia were Virginians first, not Americans. People from Georgia were Georgians first, not America. That changes after the War of 1812. There's this pride that comes out of the War of 1812 where people are proud to be Americans. They no longer worried about European intervention in North America. They had defeated or held their own against the British twice. So there's a new sense of nationality, and with that new sense of nationality, with that new pride in America, Americans start to look west, and they start to plan to move and spread their form of government, their democracy, to the west.